Continuing with our Ford problem, on page 36, we're asked what were the best and worst years for Ford, and then explain how we knew that. Well, to me, it's clearly 2008 is that worst year. You may recall the bailout and the crash of the market and all that mess. So 2008 is the worst year because of those losses. We'll just put here $15 billion loss that year. That's painful. And then the best year is clearly 2011 because they have a $20 billion profit. In fact, those $20 billion profit is totally wipes out those losses and gives them $5 billion over top of that. All right, what's the largest single year profit is question 7. Well, what that means is we're looking at the change from the previous year to the next year. So from 2007 to 2008, they had a $12 billion increase in losses. And then from 2010 to 2011, they had a $13 billion increase in profit. So the largest single year change in profit is from 2008 to 2019 because they went from negative 15 to positive 3. In other words, they had an $18 billion change. That was their single best year. They went from losing 15 billion to making 3 billion, which is a total change of $18 billion. The close second, of course, is that 2010 to 2011, where they went from a $13 billion increase in profits. Okay, and then the last question on this previous page. A mathematical way of expressing profits is to use a positive number. This is going to show up in chapter 3 when we talk about stock. And then a negative number is used to express loss. That's just a great reminder of those kinds of mathematical representations. Okay, last set of questions for this lesson in terms of the regular part. Here we've got a bar graph of calories in a regular cheeseburger at the 3 top burger chains. So burger 1, chain 1, chain 2, chain 3. If we look at just these heights, there seems to be a huge difference between them, right? Number 1 is like 3 times number 2 and maybe twice 2 times number 1 in terms of the amount of calories, just when we're looking at the heights themselves. But then when we look at, so then number 10, it says, well, assuming that the consumer enjoys the taste of all 3 cheeseburgers, which one are they most likely going to choose based on the graph? Well, number 2, because it has the least amount of calories. If you're trying to not eat tons of calories. If your goal is to eat the most calories possible, you would choose number 1. So yeah, depends on your point of view. Now we're going to look at the second graph. I'm going to compare these side by side. Notice now that in the second graph, the beginning value for the y-axis is 0. And then we go up to 350, and you can see that the difference between these bars is really negligible. And now when we go and look at the scale, is what these units are called, we can see that this goes from 270 to 315 in terms of heights. And that really the difference between number 2, which is 280 calories roughly, and number 1, which is 310, is only 30 calories. And then number 3 looks like it's about 290. So the difference between these two is only 10 calories, and between number 1 and number 3 is only 2 calories. What this is highlighting, what our author really wants you to notice, is while this graph is technically correct, it is very misleading in terms of the picture. You have to read the scale on the left, which we often might skip if we're just reading quickly, to get the true picture of what's going on between these calories. So is this the same? Yes, it's the same information. Let's see, same information, but a different scale. How do the Burgos compare now? Again, just looking at the height, so we're just ignoring the scale, the y-axis data, and they're all the same. So what scale here? We start at 0 for the first graph and goes up to 350 with units of spacing, 50 units of spacing. I'll call them tick marks, although they're really lines. Whereas the first graph starts at 270, goes to 315, and it has 5-unit tick marks. I'll say 5-unit lines. A big difference between those two and how they're represented. So which of these 3 franchises would most likely use the first graph in advertising? Probably franchise number 2 to try to highlight that they have the smallest calorie burger. Even though in reality that's not really true. Which would be most likely used? The second, probably numbers 1 or 3 to show that there is no difference. And which one is correct is the second one, or I shouldn't say correct, which one is most accurate is this graph, because the picture matches the numbers. Whereas this graph, the picture does match the numbers, but it's exaggerating the difference between the amount, because we've got the difference between these lines is really kind of minimal. Okay, last question is a cluster bar graph, and that's where we essentially put together multiple bar graphs to try to compare things. So here we've got 3 different months, and we've got the daily average shares traded in millions for Apple, Microsoft, and Intel. So each of these companies is its own category, but we're looking through the lens of the months of June, July, August, September, and October for how many shares were traded. This is called daily volume, and we're going to talk about this in 3.6 when we look at a real brief look at buying and selling stocks. So number 15 says, which company had the greatest variance in trade volume over that period? Variance means spread, like different amounts being traded kind of all over the place, as opposed to being basically the same. And Apple starts low, goes high, then returns to low in terms of the volume traded. Which one is the most consistent? I would say, is it Microsoft? It's between Microsoft and Intel, clearly. I feel like Microsoft is a little more consistent. They're all really close to 30 million. In fact, June, July, and October are just, June, July, September, and October are just about 30, and August goes the highest, hitting 40. Although Intel is close, this is really kind of a matter of opinion without having the exact numbers. We'll just say it stays close to 30 million. All right, and which company had the lowest overall shares during this period? Well, if you look at the bars, Microsoft is the lowest for all but August, and their Intel is just slightly below it, whereas on all the other months, Intel is higher than Microsoft, and Apple is just over the top for all of them. So Microsoft, it's got the lowest volume for each month. All months but August. And then August isn't huge enough of a difference to overcome the differences in all the others. Okay, so now you should feel fairly comfortable in reading bar graphs. You'll be creating some of these in project